you. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all this morning. I'm just going to invite up Mark. It's so great to have Mark here. So on a personal level, I knew Mark in St. Andrews years ago when I was an erstwhile student. So it's kind of fun to be able to interview you.
It is.
Mark is our speaker for this weekend. And so I'm just going to ask you a few questions. If you could just let us know who you are. So first, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think when we first met, Kaete. It would be, is it a decade ago or more?
Yeah, probably. Now you're showing my age, Mark. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, you were only 12 at the time. So, well, what do you want to know? I'm Scottish. I grew up in actually quite a hostile family when I first came to faith at 16. And there's a lovely long story about family members coming to faith subsequently. My father before he died, my mother just after my dad died. So there's that kind of lies in my background. I married to Jenny. We have 4 children, Katrina, then Sandy, Hamish, and Gregor. And some folks here know my little baby boy, Gregor, who's a rugby player. And yeah, he's not little. Anyway, what else?
Just a bit about, so how did you become a Christian? We're going to talk about Chalmers Institute in a second. So
okay.
Just kind of the lead up to some of the work you've done.
Well, I came to faith in my last year at high school. So I grew up just near Stirling and went to school in Crieff. My grandfather asked me if I wanted to join the church, and I thought, well, why not? And went along, started reading the Bible, and went to classes at the church which were absolutely useless and didn't do anything. It was really a friend in a tent when we were camping, and we had a massive argument, and he quoted scripture to me, and no one had ever done that before. And I felt like I could argue with him, but I couldn't really argue with what scripture seemed to say. And the issue at that point, I understood very, very, very little. It really was, I'm not a Christian. There's some kind of response required from me to God that I have to make. And it's not about me trying to perform very well and hope that outweighs my mistakes. So that was my coming to faith. It was a very, very immature, very weak faith initially. And then just before starting university, I went to Glasgow University to study medicine. I was going to live at home and travel to Glasgow every day. And then God intervened quite dramatically. I broke my leg very badly working on a building site, one of my dad's building sites, actually. I swung on a big concrete beam, and it fell down, and I fell down underneath it, and it landed on my leg. And my leg continued on out the back of ended up with quite a bad fracture of my left leg. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was God's way of uprooting me from home and then replanting me in university in a hall of residence where there were guys there who have become lifelong friends, who were brothers, and who we nurtured each other's faith together. So that was wonderful. Also, it was an accident where I should have died, and it caused me to stop very suddenly and say, if I should have died, God's let me live, so from now on I need to live for him. So I started university really with that renewed commitment.
That's amazing. My goodness, wow. I didn't know those stories. Goodness.
Well, there's lots of other interesting, there's other bits to it. Can I tell this bit?
Sure.
My father came to see me. I'd just been rushed to the casualty department at Stirling Royal, and which existed at that point. And I was lying on a trolley screaming, because I have a very low pain threshold, and I was still in my work clothes. My dad had only heard that I had had a fall on the building site. So he comes into this room and he sees me screaming and making a huge fuss and thinks I've just had a fall, and what's the big deal? Why are you making such a fuss about it? He didn't realize I was screaming because my left tibia was poking out the back of my leg. He couldn't see that, which is fair. And he came up beside me, and obviously in his embarrassment, he said, "Shut up, boy, you're as much of a man now as you'll ever be." Now, I knew from my mother that he regretted saying that, but it was actually almost exactly 29 years later and 29 years of really wrestling for relationship with my father, who was a tough man. Just after I graduated medicine and I knew I was called out of medicine, he came and took me out for dinner and said, if you ever leave medicine to do this Christian ministry nonsense, I will cut you off and you will never see us again. And you fast forward to 29 years after I broke my leg, by which time he wanted to help us get the house in St Andrews that you knew us in, and wanted to do so because he said, yeah, I understand what you do, and I believe in it, and I want to support it. So it was amazing to see what God did in his life. But it was after 29 years that we were on holiday. My mother made a joke about my legs. I said, Jan, look at that big ugly scar. And my dad drew me off to the side, and he said, shut up, you're as much of a man as you'll ever be. What a terrible, terrible thing to say. I will bear the shame of that to my grave. And we then had this wonderful conversation about shame and about guilt and about the fact that from my point of view, this was forgiven so long ago. And the thing about God's forgiveness is that someone else bears the shame for you, Dad. And we have this wonderful photo of him just about half an hour after that with this big goofy smile on his face. And he died about 4 months after that. But it was this wonderful, took 29 years to get there. You think, why couldn't you just have done this 29 years ago? But part of my story then is how God intervened in my life, but also how he has, over a long, long time, with lots of pain along the way, brought people like my dad to be reconciled. So
that's amazing.
That's a much longer answer than you wanted.
No,
sorry.
I love it. It's great. It gives us a picture. And so, yeah, you referenced the house in St Andrews.
Yes.
So Jenny and Mark had this beautiful home that they opened up to students. I wasn't even in your church, but I was welcomed as just one of the students to come and learn from something called the Chalmers Institute. So can you just talk to us about what is because this is where you work now. You're the director of the Chalmers Institute. So what is it?
It sounds really grand, and it's really not. It really. We chose Chalmers Institute rather than Chalmers Centre because if you Google Chalmers Centre, it's a sexual health clinic just around the corner from here, and we didn't want to be mistaken for that. Although there's children here. I shall behave myself at this point.
So can you just tell us what is the Chalmers Institute? What's the heart and vision for it? Yeah.
So we did medicine until 2002, but we moved to Edinburgh in 98, did student ministry here in Edinburgh from 98 till 2004, and then went to study theology in the States, but then did a PhD in St Andrews after that. So there was a kind of trajectory there. And the heart behind doing that was the realization that theology matters, that it's not an abstract thing that floats off there that academics do, but it really makes a difference to how we live. It should serve discipleship and it should serve mission. It should help us to love God and our neighbor better. And especially in an environment, a culture like ours that's saturated with ideas 24/7, being able to outthink and outlive the culture is a big burden, and it developed through our time of doing theological education. So in St Andrews, ended up leading a church there, but it was your minister, it was Andrew Rollinson, some of you might know Andrew, who came to us and said, will you do some training for our interns? And we said, sure. And so Chalmers started as just in our home on Mondays, trying to give people, if you like, the theological tools for discipleship and mission to serve that. And it kind of just grew from there, really. And the idea was that there we were learning rigorous theology, thinking about the so what questions, and then having lunch and doing dishes together and living life together. So it's that life context rather than it being abstracted from daily life.
Yeah, and I can testify, I found it so helpful just to have in the morning. We would normally have a more theoretical session. We'd have the break for lunch for that engagement with one another in chat, and then in the afternoon it'd be quite practical. So often running through pastoral case studies, anonymous case studies, but just thinking through how does this actually work, and it just was really beneficial.
It's lots of fun.
Yeah, it was great. So, and it continues on. But okay, so just thinking about this weekend, obviously you're here and you're here to speak to us about what it means to be made in the image of God. So why is this topic important? What excites you about it? And then I'll pray for you and hand over to the band.
Yeah, thank you. Why this topic? Because Graham asked me, is the short answer to that one. But actually, this traces right back to my time at seminary of grappling with this topic and coming back thinking, I've got to work out ways of communicating this, that the gospel is so much bigger. It's about everything, and that the good news of Jesus applies to absolutely every aspect of life. And that starts with, in the beginning, God created, and everything follows from that. So this idea of building a biblical view of reality that shapes then how we understand the world that we live in, and then how we live in it as well. And then an understanding of discipleship that says that in this cultural moment, discipleship involves deconstructing a default secular view of reality and then building a biblical view of reality in its place. And that's an exciting task, but it requires all of the biblical and the theological resources we can bring to it. So, yeah, I'm excited about this because I think that the issue of God creating in his image has perhaps never been more under attack culturally than it is right at this particular moment. And I hope that will give a bit of a framework to help us to think about that and respond rightly.
Yeah, that's so great. And I actually like that way of using deconstruction in a positive context. I'm excited about that. Okay.